Well, uh, there's so much discussion about vaccines on television and in the media, though we've talked about them some before. I think you may find tonight's discussion, particularly the very last slide, I bet you will say, gee, and it's a good example that you may start out to try to find one thing answer, and you don't find the answer to that, or you may be thwarted, and you find something else more important than what you started for, particularly in science and actually going out and hunting. Same thing can happen. And in the 1980s, Carrington Laboratory, well, it was originally AvaCare, a small multi-level company, sold 12 products made from the aloe leaf gel. One of them was a beverage. And at the height of the panic over the AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, at the height of the panic over it, the company got, I believe it was 7 little notes. That time we didn't have emails. We had faxes and cards, basically saying I was on my deathbed waiting to die from this disease of unknown cause with no treatment. And somebody in my life got me to drink your aloe juice that you sell in a 32-ounce bottle in a polycarbonate container. And now I'm out off my bed. I'm back at work and in school. Thought you'd want to know. And the head of the company came to me at Dallas-Fort Worth Medical Center seeking a physician's assistant to try to develop a new FDA-approved antiviral drug for the AIDS virus. And I told him no, he needed to go to a medical school, get an infectious disease specialist, that I really wasn't qualified to help him. Well, he kept coming back, and I found out long time later, he was trying to go to medical schools and get qualified people to help him, and they wouldn't give him the time of day because this wasn't a potential pharmaceutical to start out with. It was a natural product, the gel from the aloe leaf. Well, try to make a long story short, at least 11 different academic institutions and medical schools and veterinary schools were incorporated to work on the basic science research that the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, required to develop a new drug. And finally, with a lot of urging, I decided I would help them. But I thought I would show them that by doing a pilot study in AIDS patients, that this was a hoax. This was sort of mass hysteria, that there wasn't any way that drinking aloe juice was going to have any effect on the AIDS virus, as it was eventually determined. Well, lo and behold, using the New England Journal of Medicine, which is essentially a papal bull for American medicine, using an article by Robert Redfield, who was the last head of the CDC. He was a younger man then at one of the military hospitals, wrote a paper on staging of AIDS. And I adapted from that. We applied the criteria for staging AIDS about every 2 weeks to a month with 15 patients. Lo and behold, they improved 72% in 90 days on this criteria published in the New England Journal of Medicine. I was shocked. And as I frequently say, that was the results that changed the course of my personal and professional life. But that wasn't the end of the story. as they continued doing basic research, they found out that every virus that's pathogenic in various animals, also a plant virus, and then a panel of human viruses were all prevented from being infected. If the infection was already present, the virus active, it blocked it immediately. And in proper cell cultures, with immunoperoxidase stains that stain for viral proteins with the proper antibodies, the cells rapidly cleared the virus. The host defense of the body was boosted to 2 levels, that being the immune system as part of host defense, 2 levels never seen before. And that was the first indication that we really had something significant. And then they went and found out by boosting the body's immunity that every bacteria and fungus and tuberculosis, and finally, even out of Africa, even malaria, blood parasites were cleared because the body's immunity was boosted to new levels. So something very metabolic important in the biochemistry of the immune system and host defense was being activated. And now I will try to go to the first slide. And I think I push on screen share. And I believe I can click on this. And well, let's see. Do you see it?
Not yet.
Not yet. Do you see it now?
No. So make sure that when you click on the screen share button, it's going to bring up a new window. And inside of that new window, we want you to click on PowerPoint.
Power what?
PowerPoint. It's just a...
Well, I see a little dot PowerPoint and I'm clicking on it.
There we go.
Yeah, it did it. And this gives you a better thing, doesn't it?
No, it's perfect right where it's at.
Very good. Now, several things happened at different places in these institutions. In our little laboratory, I could look under the microscope on a scanning vision and could see white cells in cultures moving around slowly, haphazardly, phagocytizing, or it's called eating or absorbing bacteria that you could feed them. But if you put a small amount of the active ingredient from the aloe, which we eventually found out was acetylated mannose sugar, that's called acemannan, that these little boogers got just so energetic you couldn't keep up with them on the microscope. You couldn't move it fast enough, and they gobbled up bacteria, and you wouldn't believe how energetic they were. They also did pigs with wound experimental wounds on one side of the miniature pig, and they would use the other side for control and put a gel made from the aloe leaf gel on the wounds on one side to see what it would do in terms of healing time and scarring, and would they get infected and all. And lo and behold, they found out that the opposite side of the pig, where you had the control wounds and you weren't putting aloe on it, they would heal faster too. And they said, gee, there's a systemic effect that is carried by the blood to the other side of the pig. And they began to think this is very interesting. And they decided that this could be a systemic adjuvant. Now, most adjuvants that are mixed with vaccines are a a physical or mechanical kind of a waxy-like material that you mix with it and you put it underneath the skin, and it's not absorbed real rapidly, and it's over a period of time, it leaches out to the immune system, and it gives a prolonged stimulation for the vaccine to try to elevate the antibody levels to give protection. Well, a systemic adjuvant would be that it's not a mechanical thing, that there is biochemical activity going on in the cells at the level of cellular synthesis that boosts the cascade of biochemistry to turn on the body's defense mechanisms. Well, I want to go to this slide. This is an independent study that was published under contract for Carrington Laboratories, and it was at the University of Texas Health Science Center by these two independent PhD infectious disease researchers. And they said they tested the killing of Escherichia coli, which is a gram-negative pathogen potential, and also a gram-positive, that's a special stain. When you smear or get bacteria from wounds or from the blood, you do what's called a gram stain, and if it stains blue, you say it's gram-positive, and you use certain antibiotics for that gram stain. If it stains red, it's called a gram-negative, and you use other antibiotics, and E. coli is a gram-negative, the Staphylococcus is a gram-positive, as examples for these two classifications of pathogenic bacteria that affect the body. And of course, these murine macrophages are big white cells, and what they were showing is that the active ingredient from the aloe activated, like I was telling you before, under the microscope, you could see the white cells all of a sudden with the presence of the aloe just running around gobbling up the pathogenic bacteria. And what they did is they took different concentrations and different potential activities to see how they would affect the white cells engulfing the gram-negative E. coli. And here, number one, it was much better than the controls, and the others were not quite as good. But this was the aloe oligosaccharide. The next slide shows that for the E. coli, the gram-negative, that they did bacterial staining, which is in vitro, that the bacteria that are inside the white cells, are they alive or are they dead? And with that same aloe, you can see compared to the controls, there was no killing of the bacteria that they had engulfed at an hour. But with the aloe oligosaccharides, there was a significant increased killing. And these other things that were tested was even a little less. The next slide was the gram-negative aloe-ace mannan concentration gradient. So they took the percent cells that were dead inside the white cells at 1 milligram per milliliter of culture media, 3 milligrams, and a 1 milligram. And you can see as you increase the amount of aloe, you had more killing of these pathogenic gram-negative bacteria, which the E. coli is a representative of. Now, this is for Staph aureus, the gram-positive. And again, you see that the percent killing of these these blue staining pathogens of the gram-positive bacteria is very similar. A growth curve here, concentration, that I'm giving you a lot of detail of why from all of this, some deductions were made. And this was again with the Staph aureus. And again, it reproduces that the percent dead goes up as you increase the amount to get it. And it just confirms what we've seen before. Now, the first commercial product Carrington Laboratories made was dermal wound gel. It's also called dermal wound dressing. And so it was approved by the FDA, and there were certain experiments done. And I told you about the pig wounds healing faster, like the experimental side, that there was a systemic benefit. Both sides would heal faster, even though you only applied it one side. And the rate of healing with the aloe added was approximately 20% increased rate of healing. With this knowledge and what I was telling you before, they had horse vaccines against certain viruses that I had never heard of or susceptible to horses, and they could not get a protective level to prevent infection to these viruses for the horses. However, with all this other knowledge, by adding just a little bit of the aloe mannose, they produce protective levels or titers of antibody never obtained in past efforts. And so worthless experimental viral vaccines by this systemic adjuvant now produce antibody levels that protected the animals. And they said this is a robust systemic adjuvant. The next thing they did is they did several dozen chickens and then several hundred baby chickens with Solvay's trivalent vaccine. Now, Solvay is a company in Belgium. They have a base here in the United States in Minnesota, but it is the largest produced vaccine on the planet. Fact is, we complained, we kind of like the idea of protecting horses. And we said, what are you going to do? Go into chickens because they're so much cheaper? And they informed us that the biggest commercial sale of vaccines were for chickens, because several times a year, they'll have thousands of chickens in various broiler houses, and they feed them for about 78 days, depending on the weight of the chicken that the people want for meat. And they kill them, and then they start all over again. And some of the information about epidemics and herd protection is done on chickens, because in these chicken houses, they'll have 10 to 15,000 chickens in one enclosure. And this is a setup for terrible loss if a virus gets started. So when baby chicks are hatched on the day of hatching, the first thing they do is debeak them very fast. They take the sharp tip off their vaccine, because they're little creatures that will peck each other and will kill. If a little bloody spot gets on a baby chicken, all the chickens around it will start pecking that little spot and kill it. So they debeak them, and at the same time, very rapidly, they put a drop of this trivalent vaccine made by Solvay of Belgium that they've developed over the years. And this trivalent means three different viruses: Newcastle virus, infectious bursal disease, and then Marek's, M-A-R-E-K-S, Marek's virus. I'll tell you a little more about later. Anyway, at Texas A&M, by adding just a little bit of the aloe polymannose, and at that time, that's what we called it, because the sensitivity of the instruments were lower in the 1980s, and the principal monosaccharide or sugar made in the aloe leaf was 40 to 50% mannose, and we couldn't detect that any other sugars were there. And so poly means many. We thought that the chain was made up of just mannose sugars. Anyway, that's what we called it at that time. And by adding this, that the trivalent vaccine gave a 60 to 65% herd protection in the chicken houses. but by adding just a little bit of it, went above 90% in the hands of Texas A&M as they did dozens and few hundred chickens. So they took this information to Solvay of Belgium, as you see in number 4 there, the largest producer of vaccines on earth, and they were very skeptical, to say the least. They thought these Texans didn't know what they were doing. Well, eventually, Solvay, over a 4-year period, did testing of this aloe extract sugar, which we found eventually was Acetylated. 20 million chickens were tested in audit procedures. In other words, they didn't test every chicken, 20 millions. They would pick one out of every, say, 1,000 and do antibody levels and and expand that to the 20 million in over 20 different broiler companies over a 4-year period. Well, in Solvay's hands, they couldn't believe that adding just a small, almost undetectable amount of the active ingredient from the aloe plant, they got near 100% protection against the 3 viruses in the trivalent vaccine. Fact is, it was so close to 100% that you'll see there in quotes, rapid handling error. They thought that 1 to 3% that did not get protection was due to handling so fast that they missed getting a drop of the vaccine down the nose. And so they came up with publication of all their research, which is going to be the cover of the brochure for marketing their improved vaccine that started right here at Texas A&M in Texas, doing work for Carrington Laboratories. And you can see it says the biggest thing to come along in years. That's what they call it. And they named it a trademark, ACM1. And then they put there at the bottom, a revolutionary new additive that delivers superior performance. And I'm going to show you in the next few slides some of their work of why they would say such an incredible statement from an independent testing source. And this is actually the product that a picture from this brochure that they would add saline to this and just put a drop down the nose or in the mouth of a baby chicken when they're debeaking it. And it's for, say, broilers, and this is a code to purchase it. Now, the first paragraph of the marketing brochure I'm going to read to you. An age-old plant helps Solvay Animal Health Incorporated revolutionize poultry performance. When they're saying poultry performance, they're talking about adding this to their trivalent vaccine. Within the last decade, scientists have discovered that certain polysaccharide polymers, polysaccharides means chains of sugars. Sugar molecules form complex chains, are immune stimulants. One of the most studied and developmentally advanced of these is acetylated, which I've been referring to you, a substance extracted from the gel or the sap of the aloe vera, and the species is Aloe barbarensis Miller plant. Now, why are they so excited? Well, of those 3 vaccines, the Merrick's virus is the source of the biggest financial loss in the broiler industry. Merrick's virus causes T-cell lymphoma in chickens. And what this tells you is that with the old vaccine, when they used that trivalent vaccine, it took about 14 days to show protection to the baby chicks. If you will follow the dark blue, that is their vaccine with the acetylated added. And the blue appears at 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. Look at the increased protection against Merrick's virus, the biggest loss of money that happens in the broiler industry. So instead of 14 days, you can see that it was really a powerful adjuvant. Now, compared to their old, there was in small tests, there was a 38% improved production at 4 days. And if they took it on out to 14 days, they got 2% more improvement by the addition. So this was part of why they're so excited and gave that first page statement. Now, in 23 different broiler companies, 21 of them validated the addition of the acetylated mannose added to the trivalent vaccine in regard to the worst loss they can have due to Merrick's protection. And this is just the 23 companies only. You don't get 100% almost any type of experiment. We had one of them that had a failure out of the 23 right there. But this is thousands of chickens that they're getting results from. Now, for overall mortality for any reason, and that's beyond viral epidemic, they were able to show that by 6 paired broiler companies, there was nearly a 1% reduced mortality for all things. Well, 0.85% doesn't seem like much, but if you got 15,000 chickens in this one broiler house and you multiply it by 0.85% that you're saving from all types of mortality, that's 1,270 birds in that house, which is a major profit margin. So this is part of why they are excited. And another thing, some of the houses can get too hot, and heat stress causes some problems. And you can notice, like here in this number 6, with the Ace Manning that they had used in the vaccine, the chickens handle the heat stress far better, like 1, 2, 3. You don't get the same thing at everything, but much improved there for the heat stress problems with chickens. Now, they had a paired trial with some companies, and they had a 0.21% government inspector reduction in carcass rejections. And this was in 5 or 6 trials that for different causes that the government inspector will reject the carcass, the vaccine combination with Ace Manning improved the results. Now this was something that really hit me upside the head. They saw chickens gain more weight on less chow. And this triggered a search on my part for how in the world is this possible? And I'm going to share with you a solution that was found that I think has significant findings. And now also there was a very little less chow that they needed, but when you're doing 15,000 observations, what we say N equal 15,000 observations, you can detect very small variations in biostatistics. This was a lesson for me in biostatistics. If, and say only 25 to 50 animals or human beings, you get enough benefit that you get statistical significance, you know that you're having a major impact on the improvement you're looking at. But if you have a very small improvement, it takes many observations in biostatistics to tell that it's significant. And lo and behold, these chickens gain more weight on less food. Now this is a summary of 400,000 chicks. in 20 broiler companies over a 4-year test period. That's 400,000 out of the millions. And this included also the heat stress flocks that also showed significant difference. And you can see the mortality versus the controls was reduced. That the difference was 0.85 that I showed you. The condemned carcasses for multiple reasons was about half, almost half what it was in controls. In other words, 48.48. And here's the feed conserve version, which is very small amount, less food that they gained on. But when you're trying to make money, anything that reduces your costs, when you multiply it by numbers like we're talking about, 15,000, or in this case, 400,000, you not only can detect it, but it becomes a significant amount. And I only put this up as this is the cover of this brochure that was sent out to all the broiler companies. And I just showed you why they called it the biggest thing to come along in years. And they called it a revolutionary new additive that delivers superior performance in chicken vaccines, which are the biggest use of vaccines on the planet. Now, this is actual work that I did, and I'm pleased with it. I said, why in the world could these baby chickens gain more weight on less food that you could detect? Well, I found out when the baby chicks are given the trivalent vaccine without the Ace Manning, they would put back into the room where they keep the baby chicks, and they would stand still, squint their eyes, fluff their little down feathers, spread their wings, and refuse to eat or drink for about 24 to 48 hours. Well, in the high end values, like 10 to 15,000, this lack of eating and losing a little bit of weight could be detected with such high numbers. By adding the Ace Man into the trivalent vaccine, these above observations were eradicated. They immediately started eating and drinking, and they didn't stand around like they didn't feel good, shall we say, as far as you can tell about a baby chick. Well, in 78 days, which is the average feeding period before they slaughter chickens, 1 to 2 days of a little loss of weight and eating no food could be detected. And very significantly in these large numbers, the Marek's virus T-cell lymphoma was eradicated from the flocks. This is the top loss in the broiler industry because you pay for having chickens debeaked, have them vaccinated, you feed them out for 78 days, you have to catch them and put them in, pay people to do it, put them in these pens and take them to the slaughterhouse. You pay the slaughterhouse to kill the chickens, to take the feathers off of them, cut the heads off, the feet off, and here you have the carcass ready to be either sent frozen or fresh to the market. And the government inspector sees blotches in their skin, this sort of cream-colored aggregates of T-cell lymphoma cells, and they condemn the chicken, and it's burned to an ash. And that's the reason Marek's T-cell virus, T-cell lymphoma, is the biggest financial loss of the broiler industry. And by adding just almost undetectable amount of the Aloe Manning, you eradicated the Marek's virus. Also, that the flock herd protection was raised from 65 cents to nearly 100%. As I said before, it was so close to 100, they thought the people that were rapidly debeaking and putting a little drop of vaccine missed a chicken ever so often. Well, also what you keep hearing about in the news about herd protection. Well, the viral epidemics in chickens with the huge n number of babies, then the chickens are an animal and man is an animal, is the basis for what you hear about herd protection they're commonly seeking, and epidemiology, and to control epidemics. In other words, if you get 60 to 65% herd protection, they're in the chain reaction of one chicken or one human infecting another one. But of course, when you get up close to 100, it's really an improvement, but that's very unusual. Now, my role at Carrington Laboratories starting in 1985, which was 36 years ago, they wanted me to come in and project and predict potential benefits if the active ingredient from the aloe were made into a FDA approved pharmaceutical. So I was always trying to keep my eyes open and my ears cocked for anything that happened. And when I heard about the baby chicks and the change, I immediately thought about, you probably know that every child that gets DPT shots, that there's a mixture for the next day to nearly 2 days of a low-grade fever, irritability, crying, sleeplessness, keep you up all night. They have a lack of appetite, nausea, vomiting, and a lot of parental concern about this miserable child. Now, getting a DPT shot is a low incidence of seizures and irritability of the brain, which is called encephalitis, and very high temperatures, which scare the pediatrician and the parents. And in my travels to North America and to 10 foreign countries, over the 10 years I was medical director for Manatech Incorporated and also medical director for Man Relief Ministries, I had a low instance of parents that would come to me with a child somewhere between 8, 15 years old. They'd be in a wheelchair with board across the arms, and the child could not lift their head up. Oftentimes they were kind of like they were in a coma or semi-conscious, eyes wandering around, couldn't focus, drooling on the thing and all. And these parents would tell me this child was perfectly normal until we gave him a DPT shot. And he had high fever. He had irritability of his brain, like encephalitis symptoms. And oftentimes they had seizures. And this is what happened. Total wiping out of this child's future. Well, as I started out by saying that vaccines are the most effective and economical public health management measure that you can do. When you talk about proper managing of water supply or disposal of sewage, you have huge capital expenses in cities before you can, you got to put all these lines out, and you have, particularly in water processing and in the sewage, you have ongoing expenses that are significant to do these things, whereas vaccines for literally pennies, you can protect children to the common diphtheria, pertussis virus, and the tetanus virus, tetanus bacteria, I believe it is. I'm wrong there. So when they would show me these children, I really felt sort of a collective downer or guilt, because I hated the thought that any physician trying to practice good medicine caused this problem. And I carried with me for some time the belief that the stress of the vaccine, which is common to every child, had uncovered previously unrecognized gene defect, which can cause dementia. However, as I continued to travel, I would have parents come to me and they would show me this normal child, and they would say the first time they had a DPT shot, it was terrible. They had a high fever. They were very sick for up to 2 days. However, they came out of it, but we didn't want to ever have another DPT shot again. However, they found out that kindergarten or child care places and starting school, they would not let the child start if they didn't have their full course of DPT injections. Also, some pediatricians would say, if you don't have this additional vaccination, I will not have your child in my practice. So they were forced to, by all this pressure, to give the second DPT shot with great trepidation. And lo and behold, it was like they injected them with water or saline. There were no symptoms whatsoever. And the reason they were pointing this out to me, because in the interim, they had gotten on oral intake of our children's oral Ace Mannose in the different children's formulations. And I immediately thought about the baby chicks and all their symptoms and how they were eradicated by just a little bit of the Aloe Ace Mannose. And so we're talking about millions of dollars of research that these events that I've shared with you, because we need better vaccines. And right at the head of the list, you never hear any complaints about smallpox vaccines or polio vaccines or individual tetanus shots when a child steps on a nail. But when you hear about DPT shots, you hear about almost uniform, all kids are sick for 24 to 48 hours. So we need a better vaccine. And I share this with you in hopes that somewhere, somehow, some way, that we may be able to, at one time, be able to investigate with the very expensive study it would take in human children, if you could get an institutional review board from an institution to approve, because I came up against one medical school that the researcher there wanted to do a ADD, ADHD study, and they rejected it. And in the 20-year history of the medical school, they had never approved a research project on a child, because anything that you might go wrong with research, you're talking about a lifetime of disability or inducing damage. One of the first dictums of medicine is do no damage. And sometimes we lean over backwards in our human nature to avoid any kind of stress or exposure. So that's maybe more information about vaccines and our experiences with them than you ever wanted to know. But there's a lot of great potential of the fact that this acetylated mannose called Ace Mannose supports the normal biochemistry, physiology that is coded in the genes to use nutrient molecules to make bioactive molecules to make all the systems of the body. And what we're talking about here is host defense and immunity for protection against infectious agents, and how this molecule improves the biochemistry and physiology. It is not the treatment, cure, or mitigation of disease or normal abnormal activity. What it is nutritional support of the normal biochemistry that is carried out in cellular synthesis by the coding that's in the genes. So that's the end of this presentation.
Well, I hope that everybody that's watching this will be able to understand the weight that this has behind it. That being said, we're going to go ahead and open it up to questions. The easiest way that we have found for you guys that are watching to ask us questions is to write it in the chat and send it to us. And so I'm going to go ahead and remove the sharing so that people can see you, Dr. McDaniel, answering these questions. So the first question is, well, I'm not surprised at all. I don't think any of us will be. What are your thoughts on this for the current COVID-19 vaccines?
A very good question. And not only in the research for Carrington Laboratories that was done for the FDA, did every animal and human pathogenic virus tested, was it preventive and blocked and reversed the metabolism of the virus and other infectious agents. During the SARS epidemic in Hong Kong, I got a phone call that a distributor had sent the original formulation based on the Ace Manning processing with alcohol, that they had elderly and very young patients with SARS in the ICU units, that in their experience, they would die within a week. They started oral, more comprehensive nutrition built around the active ingredient from the aloe vera plant. And they said within 24 to 48 hours, they could tell significant clinical improvement, that instead of dying in a week, they went home free of symptoms and obviously didn't die. And they wanted me to come to Hong Kong, bring cases of the formulation at that period, which was called ambertose, and to give a series of lectures and try to organize a major study with volunteer physicians there in Hong Kong. I started putting things together, and we had a meeting scheduled in Seattle, Washington. And after this meeting, I was going to drop down to Hong Kong and take everything with me, but the phone rang before I could leave Dallas, and they said, there's no use coming. The research director for a major pharmaceutical company has come into town, throwing around money like there's no tomorrow, and has engaged every physician, every healthcare institution and laboratory in two tests to test two new potential antiviral drugs. And so there's nobody to work with to do this study, so it came to an end. Well, the important thing of that story is that the SARS virus is a coronavirus, a kissing cousin of this China virus that all evidence indicates it's been modified at the Wulong laboratory, and it's more virulent than it initially was. And therefore, I strongly suspect, though the research has not been done, that by taking this oral dietary supplement daily, that your body's defenses are at such a level that you're protected against the coronavirus. And I am in contact with all kinds of people, and I have not taken the viral injection. If you go to a government website for adverse reactions to vaccines, and they have, I think, about 50 different vaccines there, and all the reactions that reported to the government. And you will find that for the coronavirus or the China virus, there are actual cases that they feel like there has been rapid death from taking these new vaccines. And I am very hesitant to take a rapidly developed vaccine that actually the media refuses to even allow you to post on Facebook or any of the social medias adverse reactions to the vaccines that are being offered. And I'm much aware that I was presenting in the Washington, D.C. area on a Saturday, and about an hour after I was into my lecture, a very well-dressed man appeared and was standing at the edge and just stood there until I was through. He came forth and introduced himself, and he was a Seventh-day Adventist minister, and he got there late because on Saturdays they have their Sabbath worship, so he got there late. But he says, "Who are you and what are you doing? And can you tell me what I've missed?" He says, "I've got emails and phone calls from all over the United States telling me that I have to come and hear your lecture on the power of this to support and normal health." And then he finally said, well, one of the reasons he was contacted, that he was the church's formal representative of the Defense Department for the White Box program, White Coat program. He says, "You're aware of that, aren't you?" I said, "Well, no." He said, "Well, in World War II, all the young people in the Seventh-day Adventist Church refused to be trained to kill people in the military, and they were called conscientious objectors." And I had heard that term before, and in the I would say image of that of those times in the government propaganda, there was a very thing lower than what was regarded as a conscientious objector. And I had a very negative opinion of that. But he said, these young people volunteered for the White Coat program to test rapidly developed vaccines because we were sending thousands of troops into the islands of the Pacific and into Africa, where there were all types of pathogenic viruses, which was no treatment and no vaccine. So they were having rapid development of vaccines. And that actually some of these white coat young people died from these experimental rapidly developed vaccines because the biochemistry of our body has so many areas of balance that you throw something in of this nature and you don't know the ramifications of what effect it can have. It can cause chaos in, say, the blood coagulation system, or in the nervous system, or even in your heart rate and breathing rate, which is all run by the nervous system. And this rapid development of a vaccine that usually takes years, that they've done in months, I'm very hesitant to take it until we have a lot more information about it. And I take about 4 scoops of the bulk current formulation, and I consider myself bulletproof against it. In fact, my wife is a physician, and not long ago she noted, we've been married 30 years and I've never had the flu, that I have never spent one day in bed with any kind of viral epidemic that's going around in the hospital or in the community. because I have been taking the acetylated mannose from the aloe plant since 1985. And what more can I say? It was developed to be an antiviral drug. It was well documented by multiple institutions that it prevented viral infections, and in fact, all infectious agents, because of the body's host defenses, were elevated against any type of infection. That's a long response, but you have to make up your own mind about what you want to do, and I've made up mine.
Very, very well said. I stand by you in that decision. The next question that we have is, would you say that optimized nutrition actually protects the individual from side effects from a vaccination?
Well, for example, I've heard of people complaining how sore their arm was as a minimal complaint about getting the current vaccine. My wife is a drug addiction specialist. She has over 100 addicts for heroin, cocaine, methamphetamines, this all kind of junk that people will develop addiction for. And that's a terrible contact for potential catching a China virus or any kind of virus. So I loaded her up on the Ace Manning before she had her injection. She didn't even get a sore arm. And that is my limited experience here in the home. But just like those baby chicks that had their trivalent vaccine combined with the aloe, they didn't have any of those terrible symptoms that strongly suggestive of how children respond to the DPT shot. And we had anecdotal reports of children that had their first DPT shot, terrible reactions, but when into their diet, they had had the aloe polymannose or Ace Manning in child formulations, they had absolutely no reaction to their second DPT shot. And I think that's enough anecdotal experiences that I feel confident if we had the money and the approval to do the study, that we would get excellent results of, and I might add, in addition to this, various doctors have, for example, in Colorado Springs, children with taking psychotropic drugs for bipolar disorder, they're too high or they're depressed and too low. They continued to take the drugs, which have multiple adverse side effects. But when they added to their diet the original formulation, their highs and lows balanced out, and the investigators at the first 6 weeks examination of the patients called me on the phone and broke down in tears over how emotionally impacted they were about the benefits, not only to the children, that all their side effects of their drugs were reduced, and the style of life and quality of life for the whole family, particularly the mothers, because the mothers carry such a load when you have a child with a significant disability or deviation from normal. It's a great stress on the changes that this added to the whole family quality of life was something that drove them to tears of joy. And we had an oncologist from that was trained at the Mayo Clinic that was a medical oncologist. He gave IV chemotherapy to cancer patients. And he reported that also the toxicity and side effects from the drug for cancer was major reduction in these toxicities and side effects when you had this on board. And we've seen it in other drugs that they required less of the pharmaceutical and eliminated the toxicity and side effects, because this supports the synthesis in all normal cells, a major increase in intracellular glutathione. This was shown at Texas A&M School of Veterinary Medicine. And this inside the cell production of glutathione is a compound that binds to all free radicals and oxidative products and balances the intracellular environment to move it to the normal zone. And as we say, the doctors are using pharmaceuticals against the abnormal cells. All we're doing is improving the nutritional supply to the normal cells, and we don't treat, cure, or mitigate disease.
Perfect. Yeah, that I sure hope that answers the question. The next question that we have here, is it possible to protect your cells and psyche with optimized nutrition when facing vaccinations? I think that last part's redundant, but
I don't know about I'll take the first part of it. I've been amazed by the number of people that have come to me that have had emotional or mental aberrations and deviations from normal thinking and emotional activity. I will never forget the first schizophrenic that we ran into that had about a 3 to 5 year terrible history after a schizophrenic break. And it had electric shock, all kind of chemotherapy, and nothing worked. And somebody got him to take this more comprehensive nutrition. And at this meeting, all of a sudden, all the chairs were, it was a small meeting, about 25, 30 people. All of a sudden, after I'd been introduced, about 25, 30 new people arrived. And we had to tell the hotel to bring in a bunch of new chairs. And somebody wondered who these people were. They had never seen them. And so the person that had had the schizophrenic break came up and told his story. And with his wife, the improvements that came about because it's abnormal biochemistry going on in the brain to have terrible depression, suicidal tendencies. For example, it isn't normal to be a citizen in the United States, where we have the maximum freedoms and opportunities like no other country in the world, and to say life isn't worth living, I'm going to kill myself because I'm so miserable. That isn't normal. And probably as good a proof any is that if you improve nutrition to maximize and support normal biochemistry of the brain, they don't think like that anymore. They don't see things that don't exist. They don't hear things that are not there. And I can't tell you the number of people with tears in their eyes grabbing my arm or my hand and telling me they had planned to kill themselves because they were so miserable, and they got on this more comprehensive nutrition, and they're so glad they didn't do it because they're so happy now. And they can see the good things in life, the future, and the potentials that before they just couldn't see because they couldn't run the wheels of the brain or the synapses in a normal manner and could not see any good in life. Now they can see it. So it's not only physical benefits that, the genes have the programming to make bioactive molecules by joining nutrient molecules to make compounds that operate the biochemistry of all systems of the body. And the genes are in pairs for kind of like thermostat on the wall of your house or climate control in your car. There's a comfort zone. And if it gets too hot, the air conditioner comes on. It gets too cold, the heater comes on and keeps you in the comfort zone. Well, in our genes, it's not a comfort zone. It's a normal zone, normal function zone, or a balance zone. And the father of human physiology, Dr. Hans Selye, called this zone homeostasis or balance. And more comprehensive nutrition supports moving the biochemistry to the homeostatic zone. And in the homeostatic zone, you don't have deviations from normal. And in fact, you support normal biochemistry and physiology. I hope that is understood.
I think so. There's a lot of information in that. And so the next question here is pretty interesting. Chemotherapy kills cancer cells as well as normal cells. Will the optimized nutrition in Q800 Plus help to protect your cells from those side effects?
That's what I was talking about, the production of intracellular glutathione. Cells have cycles, and there's the part of the cycle where they divide and make two cells where there's one cell. That's multiplication. But in the S1 phase, I call it good housekeeping stage of cells. Normal cells have an extended good housekeeping where intracellular glutathione, superoxide dismutase, and other compounds are made that quench free radicals and oxidative products and toxic products and neutralize them. And that's normal because, for example, one of the biggest threats to the environment of the cell is the mitochondria take glucose, for example, and break the bonds and transfer the energy that originally came from the sun. And through photosynthesis, a little bit of energy was put into the bond between carbons, and it's transferred to ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is used to move our muscles and used as power for cellular synthesis. Well, when that energy is transferred, free radicals are released. And if those free radicals were to attach to membranes within the cell, it alters their function. If they attach to the chains of DNA or the chromosomes, it can alter the information there, and that's called a mutation. And depending on how serious it is, it can cause malignancy or leukemia, lymphoma, cancer, sarcoma. Well, lo and behold, in the engineering design of life, in the genes is the information to make intracellular molecules that bind to toxic molecules and inactivate them. And in the S1 phase, normal cells do this. Malignant cells have very short S1 phases. They don't spend much energy on improving the intracellular environment. They spend their energy on making more cells for proliferation. And that's probably, if we had the funds to do the research, why oncologists repeatedly have reported such improvement. And as I like to say, the doctors are using their chemotherapy to poison malignant cells and to treat them. We don't treat anybody. All we do is improve nutrition to support the normal biochemistry, which in this case decreases the toxicity not only to chemotherapy, but any drug. The father of pharmacology, Western pharmacology, Paracelsus from Switzerland, most famous statement was, all drugs are poisons. The benefit depends on the dose. Well, the production of these molecules like intracellular glutathione gives you a differential protection for normal cells, which malignant cells do not waste energy trying to improve the internal environment of the cell. I hope that it kind of gets it across to you.
I think that's a really good step for a lot of people to look into, how the cell works and what the improved nutrition can help with that. I do want to say something about something that you, Dr. McDaniel, have mentioned twice so far in this Zoom call, and you've mentioned having studies done and how expensive those studies are. And I just wanted to let you guys know that we have heard Dr. McDaniel talk about these studies for years, and we have already implemented some plans in the future to get these studies done and started. And so once we're off the ground and we're running, we will start to put money aside so that we can get these studies done. And so we'll be working very closely with Dr. McDaniel to figure out what the first study that he wants to be run will be. And then the parameters of all of those details that go into each and every study, which are beyond numerous, I would imagine. And so with that, Dr. McDaniel, we have 3 more questions for you. First one is, you have created several versions of your nutraceuticals. How does the Q800 Plus compare to your current version that you sell on your website?
Well, since we haven't been able, because of the coronavirus problems to all industries, to have field testing, but it should be an improvement over the previous formulations. It was designed to be that way. And as I continue to keep my ear to the ground and read the literature, we have put some ingredients in it that I think will enhance its bioeffectiveness and bioavailability. But that remains to be seen, because we have to mix it and people use it. And I can tell you that slowly, since the early 2000s, that we used to tell people, don't take this if you're not going to take at least 120 days. It takes that long to correct deviations from normal in the biochemistry of the body. Well, now, slowly, as I have tweaked the ingredients, I have been getting reports from people that in 2 weeks to a month, and sometimes in days, they are amazed at the benefits. My brother got a phone call from California in the last week of an individual in his 50s whose father is 94, and the father was mute, didn't know, come here from Sikkim, where he was, what's going on, didn't know who his son was, and also had no control of his urine and bowels. He started him on the formulation just before 800 plus, and in less than 2 weeks, he calls just excited, just celebrating that his father now knows him, can carry on conversations, can take care of himself much better, is talking, and has regained urine and bowel control. All of this in a matter of days. Well, I think that the potential for 800 plus is equal to this or better. We'll just have to see. The proof is in the pudding. Doing it.
Yes, and we are very close to having our Q800 Plus ready to ship out, and we're just waiting for a couple of things to fall into place before we get that shipped out. This second to last question is this: can I just eat fresh aloe every day to fight off these things that you've been talking about?
Well, that's an interesting question because I've had a number of originally citizens that were from other countries, and they would talk about how their grandmother lived to be 85 to 95, nearly 100, and was never sick and ate aloe daily for years. The aloe active ingredient, the solids in the gel of the leaf, is less than 1 to 2%. It varies a little bit on the rainfall or the irrigation cycle, but it's 99 to 98% water. It's very difficult unless you're taking every day over a long period of time to get enough of the active ingredient from the liquid beverage or even the leaves. But yes, for example, in Africa, I advised a nursery over there in Ethiopia that they had babies from mothers that had died from AIDS, and the fathers had died, and the children had symptoms. And we were able to get industrial wearing blenders and to trim aloe leaves and start every day in all their formula to use the water gel from the aloe for the water in their powdered formula, and they could turn around these infants' symptoms and start growing and not having symptoms of AIDS. So it's possible. I can also tell you that the older plants, there is a study done, I think, in Puerto Rico, that the older plants have more of the active ingredient in them than young plants. And you never harvest leaves on plants less than 2 years old because it's just such a small amount of the active ingredient. There's a whole lot of water. But over a long period of time, yes, there's benefit, I believe, from what I've anecdotally been told in our experiences in Ethiopia with infants, that we were, over a period of time, providing, using the fluid from the aloe leaf, which is mostly water, to make their formulas.
I think that a lot of people have that same question, but it does seem like you would need to eat quite a bit of it to get that benefit.
Well, in a capsule or a teaspoon, we can put enough of the active ingredient that it would take weeks to get by this the fresh leaves. And there's a principle in biochemistry called the Michaelis-Menten substrate dynamics. And the more concentrated amount that you can give to the cells for supporting cellular synthesis, the quicker and the more of the compound you can make. I didn't understand this when I was an undergraduate, but I think I can explain it to this way, that if you were going to make, say, 20 apple pies for an event, a party or something at the church, and you ran down to the grocery store and you bought the products to make an apple pie, every time you made an apple pie, it'd take you a long while to make 20 apple pies. But if you went down and you got it all at one time, you could make those pies in a much shorter time. And this is why we were able, with the Carrington dermal wound dressing, to heal non-healing wounds in diabetics that they were going to cut off their toes, their feet, or their legs, because we were able to give to the cellular synthesis more of the product, and they could make more of the compounds to fight the infection and to heal.